I actually started developing back in 99, as in my first job and everything else. And how many of you actually know what's on the picture? Okay, so there are some newer faces. That's a cassette. You would usually put music on it. So that's how old I have been, how long have I been in the industry. And when I started off, it was a completely different environment, because I did what I would consider now, and probably most of you, really simple projects. But I didn't have Composer, I didn't have ORMs, frameworks, libraries, so I had to do everything by myself. Everything, even the global variables, SQL, everything. So it felt like rocket science. But to be honest, most of my problems were connected to something like this. And be really, really happy if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Because you would set up everything on the top, then the bottom would drop down. Then you fix bottom, top goes over. And of course, every change you have to check in two browsers, which had zero standards. Zero standards. And that was really frustrating for me. And after a few years, I decided, okay, I don't want to be in this market. I decided to do it as a hobby, or like a way of earning money while I go back to my studies. And after some time, I figured out that, well, I'm actually missing that development, that doing code and everything else. But I decided, well, okay, I'm not a person for front end. I want to do back end. And I found a job in a really nice team doing back end. Much smarter people than me did front end, and everything was nice. And one of the projects that I started with started as a doghouse. Not a literal doghouse, but it's a bit of a pun, because our logo was a dog. So it started really, really small. We had some competition that was there for about 15 years longer than us. And as we wanted to grow and grow and grow, I was really good at carpentry, so I made it bigger. I like wood, working with wood. So as we kept growing and growing, it became a two-story house, because we had more customers, more features, more money, more traffic, more everything. But at some point you figure out, well, carpentry is good, but you can't build something bigger using wood. You have to learn how to use concrete. And I had to learn how to use concrete, very badly, to be honest. And well, my business thought that we were doing this. Actually, what we were doing was this, on the technical side. It's a really old house, and we needed 2 new floors, spent more money than it would probably take to take down everything and build it from scratch. But yeah, I had to learn. And it was really frustrating, because I actually built that part downstairs as well. It was really hard, because why didn't I think in front what we're going to do later? Like, if you ever worked in business or sales or marketing, you know they have crazy ideas. And remember wood and concrete, now it's aluminum, glass, and it has to be shiny. I am not that good. So this thing started happening. It wasn't because I'm stupid, because I'm lazy, but because I didn't know how to do it better. So every Sunday and Monday evenings, we would crash down for weeks. And again, business wasn't happy about it, because they paid for this. In my head, I was building this. But to be honest, it was more something like this, code-wise. And business actually wanted that middle part, because they were not sure where the company is going to be in a year or something, so they wanted some really strange things. And it was really hard to understand, why don't we build it like normally? And every feature that I kept building, and every project afterwards, I had a type of Stockholm syndrome, where I thought, okay, So every mistake that I did on the last project was a costly one, because I had to delete a lot of code, I had to hack a lot of code, I wasn't thinking ahead enough. But then I figured out that, let's say that you want to buy a dog house, like a real dog house. You just have a dog. You come to my shop, and I tell you, yes, we have a dog house. It costs that much amount of money, but because of the last dog house that I built, you have to have a big concrete foundation, which probably costs about 20,000 times more than the dog house. But how many projects actually go from dog house to a skyscraper? Not that many. So my problem was that I was trying to over-engineer it all the time, all the way, even for some of the smallest projects ever. Donald Knuth said a long time ago that premature optimization is root of all evil. So let's talk about when testing makes no sense. My name is Miro Svrtan. On Twitter, you can find me using this handle, and you're probably now confused what the buildings and optimizations have to do with testing. Well, testing is part of the optimization. You really need to test everything all the time, all the best. So I got inspired for this talk by going to a lot of conferences where speakers like me would come and say you have to always test. I like the idea, but I hit a lot of walls because I started testing stupid code. Stupid as in not unvaluable to test. It was much quicker to just click, 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 done. On the other hand, it took me years to figure out that their context is sometimes different than my context. They might be doing an enterprise application that has 50 or 100 developers working. Sometimes I work on a 5-6 month project, maybe 1 person, 2 people, 3 people. Not that many. It goes with different ideas. So if we take just a simple website, like really simple website, something that you would be building on your own or maybe 2-3 people for a month, 2 free, nothing like Mars rover, so please keep it down. Do we need tests? In sense of, somebody reports a bug. It's going to take me maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour to fix it. And it's going to take me maybe 5 minutes to deploy it, right? So it's going to take me like 15 minutes since somebody says, hey, there's a bug, for me fixing it. Maybe sometimes it will take more. But again, it's a simple app. What if you're building an Android app? It might take you an hour to fix it, or 5 minutes, but you have to push it to Google Store, and it might take days for people to update, which means that you might be losing money in those 3 or 4 days because maybe it's your payment system that doesn't work. It's even worse on iOS. And I had a lot of colleagues that switched from PHP to Android and iOS, but they didn't switch their mindsets. Like, we have to test everything. So we kept pushing shit. And it was really hard because at that time, it took about 2 weeks for a bug to be fixed in sense of first people coming in. It's now much faster, but let's take another one. What if you're building a desktop app and people download your new version, there's a bug, you fix it, they don't notice the bug. How are they going to download the new version? There's no automatic update system like Android or iOS have. So again, you might be having pissed off customers or users. On the other hand, you might be building IoT, like a router or something. Well, that's easy at least. It's on the internet, users are not doing anything with it. You can automate it, right? You create 1 million of them, you create a nice software to auto-update firmware, but what if you have a bug in the auto-update and you burn all 1 million firmwares? Are you going to tell your support staff or your sellers, well, take a USB stick, go to all 1 million customers and flash the modem, the router? That's going to be expensive, right? What if you're selling something that's not connected to internet? And you say, let's say, well, you can't wash your clothes at 90 degrees. So how are you going to fix it? Tell all of your customers, well, take your washing machine to the closest service and we'll flash the firmware. Or you're going to take service people to everybody's house. That's going to suck. So when should we write tests? Any ideas from these examples?
When there is enough risk to
Okay. When it's high cost to fix. But what's a high cost? I mean, it's not the same cost for a small app and a washing machine, right? So maybe let's look at it as cost of fixing is higher than cost of testing. Again, million washing machines, that's going to be a really big pain in your balance. So why the hell would we test web apps? We can fix them easily. We can do them easily. We can repair them easily. And isn't testing in production the best way, right? Like, who thinks that web apps have to be tested all the way, all the time, 100% everything? Nobody. Few hands, few shy hands. Who thinks that it doesn't make any sense to test web apps? Okay, just one hand, like really just one hand. So I'm talking to like the fully testing community, okay? Maybe they should rename the conference to Dutch Testing Conference. Why am I saying this? Well, believe it or not, banks actually have websites. Yes, they transfer money from one account to another account. Do you really want your money to go to a wrong person? Or when you're paying somebody, they get, instead of sending money from your account to theirs, you get the money from theirs account back. That would be a nice bug. As long as you are not the person expecting some money coming in, like your paycheck, right? So maybe sometimes it does make some sense. So maybe we should reconsider and say when it brings value. Because it's not always money as it's this much money to fix this problem. Instead, let's invest in testing. Money is also your name, your brand, your passion, your weekends. That's value. Because if you need to deploy something on Friday afternoon, I have been in companies where that meant a working weekend. Somebody decided that it has to be shipped by that Friday. So maybe let's reconsider it as value is the benefit minus the cost. And let's not look at it only as money. Because if you have unhappy developers, they will leave your company, leave your product. And that costs a lot of money as well. Because you have to get a new person. That's going to take maybe 2-3 months. That's expensive. You actually have to have HR and somebody hassling with. Then a few months of onboarding. That costs as well. So let's look at a more real-life example. So let's say that we're building that we have a really, really big tomato farm. Like really, really big. So because it's a lot of money, a lot of people working there, a lot of people over summer picking the tomatoes, what's going to happen if we get a disease? We might lose millions. But also, people will be out of their jobs. So we have to ensure ourselves as a company to be better at it. Like, hey, let's have a lab. Let's have a person that can check that there are no diseases. Let's have a staff that's going to do that. But on the other hand, if you have only 2 tomatoes in your back garden, does it make sense? Like, probably testing that at the same value would cost thousands of euros for a few kilos of tomatoes. So if they get diseased, just go to organic market and buy some new ones. I mean, okay, of course, unless that's your hobby. But let's not mix hobby where we're ready to spend thousands of euros for something stupid. Oh. So again, what's the value? Value is benefit minus the cost. So let's not talk about writing unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, functional tests. Who does those here? Who here considers we're doing all the testing? All the testing. Any kind of testing, all the testing. So when you hear a lot of people speak, they say, yes, you have to test everything. Then my question is, okay, how do you do performance tests? We don't need them. So you're not testing everything. How do you do security testing? Well, we check OWASP list. Also, you have no security person that's actually good at it. It's just some developer looking at OWASP.org and hoping that there's no SQL injection. So what kind of testing is that? On the other hand, if you have like a really big news site, they need performance testing. They probably don't need security testing as much as a bank would need security testing, but probably doesn't need performance testing as much. Because it's not that often that thousands of people at the same time decide to transfer money in that same second, sometimes. So I have a really stupid example from Croatia. For about 8 years now, we have a digital school book. So that's the place where teachers put in your grades for all the students. And the company that built it didn't expect so many people to use it at one time, which is end of the year, which is the first use case of the whole app. Teachers will put in grades 2 weeks prior to end of school. So what teachers had to do was work night shifts, work weekends, trying to enter grades for their students for weeks. Because it would even die in 3 a.m. because they started speaking like, oh, you know, it works in 1 a.m. So everybody goes at 1 a.m. Then somebody says, well, it works at 3 a.m. Then everybody moves away to 3 a.m. as well. So, yeah. So that was a really shitty value. And unfortunately, they decided to solve it by putting more hardware until a month ago, when it, of course, crashed again. So when I was really frustrated with all the bugs that I created and people that I worked with, I wanted to tell my clients, okay, so we have to do testing, which means that feature A is not going to take only 100 hours, it's going to take 150 hours. But that means that on an invoice, we have to put 100 hours of development and 50 hours of testing, which was really weird. And I really didn't like the idea. So I just was like, okay, we're not going to test. But then some time later, I figured out, well, actually, we don't have on the invoice coding, manual testing, loading database, and every other task that we have to do. Like, we all consider manual testing if you're doing a registration form that you're going to open a browser and test that it works, right? So more or less, everybody actually tests. So the difference is having it manual versus automated. Bugs cost too, unless you work in a company that charges for fixing bugs. Some companies have a business model around it. I would, to be honest, avoid them because I have a feeling that they produce bugs so they would have more work, and then they produce more bugs because that means more work and money. But also, so was anybody buying a car, like a new car, any time ago, or is considering maybe buying a new one? So Let's say that you like this car, and you go to the dealership and you ask them, so is this a really good car? Yes. So you have tested it? Yes. So can I get the version without tests? Because tests cost, right? So can I get the cheaper version? What do you think would the salesman tell you there? Like, no, we don't have the tested version and the untested version. Nobody wants to buy a shitty product, especially when it costs 20, 30, 40, 50,000 euros. But somehow we as an industry think that, well, that's really okay. At one project, when I started testing, I just decided, well, I'm just going to write tests. I don't care. If you have the issues of you want to start testing, ask for forgiveness, not permission. Just start writing tests. But another misconception of mine, and I heard it with a lot of others, was that it takes extra time. A lot of time. Yes. Probably when you're going to write your first test, or when you wrote your first test, installing PHP unit, figuring out how to use it and everything else took a few hours, right? And you probably tested some really small method that has 3 lines of code, which means that to test 3 lines of code that took you 2 minutes to write, you spent 3 hours. Yeah. On the next one, it took you maybe half an hour because it was a bit more complicated, but you know more. And that time goes down and down and down, and we should not confuse learning and using. I guess that most of you are PHP developers. I'm 100% sure, well, 99.99999, that all of you are today much faster at what you do than you were on your first day when you opened up PHP, right? I said 1999 because for somebody this might be the first day of PHP, so it takes extra time. True, writing 5 lines of code and then writing 2 lines of test does take extra time because you have to write 7 lines, right? So who here writes code for 8 hours a day? Really? 8 hours a day, you're just writing code. And like no Facebook, no Twitter, no this, no that. No talking to colleagues. Okay, so who here writes code for 8 hours a day? Oh, I'm sorry. So it takes time to manual test as well. I mean, you do a small change, you have to. So if you come at 9 in the morning to the office and you hear, well, we have something to do, we must ship it in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. You go, you open your favorite editor or IDE, you change the code, then you boot up your Vagrant or your Docker or whatever, put up the browser, click, click, click to see that everything's working, right? Well, if you have everything tested, you don't have to. You can just edit it and push it. And then a CI will tell you, well, everything still works. So it might actually be quicker. This doesn't have that much to do with testing per se, but it's more an issue of what's a feature lifecycle and when should we test. So for years, I used to ship to production what would now I consider like a proof of concept. Like, hey, we need to add PayPal payments. I would just do something. It would take like 30 lines of code. Well, I'm done. PayPal works. Ship it, right? But nowadays, I consider that a proof of concept, the part of the product lifecycle, well, the feature lifecycle, where I'm trying to figure out how that something works. Because I have no idea how some payment method works, how some API works. Are they redirecting? Are they sending this or that? So that's not the point in time where you should be testing. If you're trying out new language, if you're trying new framework, that's not the part, that's not the time that you should test. You should first learn about the problem that you're trying to solve, try it out. Because if you're going to write code, test, documentation, what happened? What? Code, tests, broken, doesn't work. What? You're going to get frustrated, and something that might have been a simple task, you're going to be just pissed off. So, exploration, don't test. Modeling, architecture, that's the part where you should start writing tests. Not testing, writing tests. In the sense of TDD, not in the sense of testing. Then there's the process of developing, where you make that code, that proof of concept alive, where people can click, where that completely works, where the VAT is charged, where user is registered, where when an email is sent, when product is shipped, or whatever is your domain. And then you have the production part. What I tend to do is, when something is ready for production, I often delete some tests. Because if I'm working on payments, I tend to be really anal. Because I want to test like each credit card from each country with each stupid name, with everything, just to see that that works. But I really don't need 500 tests to check like if the payment method works for like the happy path, testing it with all of the stuff. Because, okay, I need that insurance in the development because I want to know every possible thing that I could have broken, but later, no, I'm not changing that test. I have happy paths, I have bad paths, but I don't have 500 tests that take hours to run. And I'm amazed when people tell me that they have tests that run for days. Days. One company that I was talking to some time ago, their tests on like 6 servers take something like 8 hours for each build. Which means that whatever you change is going to take 8 hours to show that that works. So if you have 10 developers, what, you're buying your own data center? I really love code coverage, and to make me better at testing, I wanted to have 100% code coverage. Why? Because the idea was, well, that way I know what I tested and what I haven't. And that's a nice goal, but it becomes really, really boring. Because maybe if you're using entities and simple getters and setters, your IDE might produce like 50 entities with 50 properties in like half an hour, but writing those tests just to test the simple getter and setter might take you a week. Like the first 10 are probably interesting, next 10 not so much. Next day I really hope you're trying to quit the company, because I would, or just be sick. But the 100% code coverage as a goal was actually due to this. Because I thought if I write the whole feature, everything, and then I write tests later, that's fine, right? Well, actually it's not, because in most cases, what most of us do, me included, you're tired of the feature, you have finally done it, you spent a great amount of time manually testing it, and then you just look through the code and if 1 return, if 7 do this, if 9 do this, if, which is not the idea of testing. You're just copy-pasting the code into test, including all the bugs as well. So, does it make sense to test something like this? Could be, maybe. I'm not sure. Another issue that I noticed with some teams was we have tests. In sense of, hey, we built a feature and then a manager came and said, well, where are the tests? You have to write tests. Why do I have to write tests? Everything works. No. It's our policy that we have to write tests. In some companies, I noticed that they don't care if their CI is saying broken for years. They just got so used to it that they just don't care. So I'm trying to see those tests as, let's say I have a car. It's registered, which means it costs money. I have it insured, but it's on the bottom of a lake. So it's costing me money and it's bringing me no value, right? And probably I have to pay some money to get it out, but... So having those tests, just because somebody said, well, we need tests, there's no value. What's the value of having a car on the bottom of a lake? Unless you're trying to put some fish, coral or something. TDD is testing. Who knows this tweet? Who knows the storm after it? Where, well, DHH said testing makes no sense because TDD is testing. Nobody? So who knows who DHH is? So that's an author of Ruby on Rails. And they have a really simple app. They have been building it for like 10, 15 years. It's a really simple app. They know the domain when they are adding new features. They actually don't have to think about modeling an architecture because it's a small feature on whatever they already have. So TDDing it doesn't make sense. But TDD has nothing to do with testing. It's modeling, it's architecture. And just like after that tweet, after last time I did this talk, a lot of people thought, well, testing makes no sense at all. Miro said that. That's a quote from a friend whose developers came to him next day with, testing makes no sense. I think that they missed when at the beginning. Maybe I should have bolded it more. So that's why I'm going through this. TDD all the way is in sense of you have to do test-driven development for everything and everywhere, which is crap. Because if you're doing CRUD entities and you have to generate a whole bunch of getters and setters, don't spend time writing one by one. That's something that you probably have done 100 times in your life, and there's no modeling in it. You're just putting properties into an object. So, if we're talking about easier onboarding, like you come to a new team, or you have a new teammate, not as in went from one team but came to a company, it's much easier to implement a new feature when you're sure that you have not broken everything else, right? Even if it takes 10 minutes for CI to tell you, well, now everything's working, it's easier. You feel more safe, right? So I think the testing makes sense for that. Who has come to a company that has 0 tests? Who of you came to a company that has tests? Which experience did you like more? Feel free to be loud. It's much easier to add new features because you know that you have not broken anything else. That's a valuable safety feature. I like safety. So that's that untested part of code because unit testing is something that has a simple if, makes no sense. But there was some law change, so we had to implement this. So again, it's 2 ifs, who cares? So it's easier refactoring, right? But how many of you know what this code does? Is it understandable? I can give you a minute or two. So, you're looking at that method, and like, I have no idea what this is. It's like an if inside an if, and if you have to put another feature, you're going to put another if inside, as long as it's not 7. So, if you had tests, it might be easier to refactor because, well, this is the original one. This makes a bit more sense, right? It's a bit easier to read. So, right? Who prefers the right side? Who can find the bug in it?
Yeah, it's not the same because if it's not copied, then it will still be different. Oh.
If you're a Dutch company, you have to pay. You're not using a getter to retrieve the country.
What?
You're not using a getter to retrieve the country. I suppose that.
No, I am. Well, okay, but it's both in both examples. So, any bug?
If you live in Netherlands, you charge VAT.
Ja, het left example does it too.
That's Dutch law.
Thank you. So you actually caught the bug, and the bug wasn't in the refactoring. It was in the first one. But how easy is it to notice it here versus here? What if we had actually tests from before, which would actually explain us, because maybe you don't know tax laws in Netherlands, so test might explain to you what they were supposed to be doing. Easier rewriting, because, well, sometimes we have to rewrite code because it has been here for 5 years. We abused it enough. We want to rewrite it. We want to change it. We want to make it better using blockchain, Node.js, and whatever. Which is not the point of this talk because it wouldn't help, but at least if you're rewriting it in a better code or maybe another framework or something, it's going to be easier. And my internet died. Sorry for that. Cleaner code. So one thing that I noticed when I started testing is that I'm starting to write cleaner code. In sense of, it's really, really hard to test shitty code. Have you ever tried it? And, like, can you write a method that has 5 ifs in it if you have to write a test? Like, that test is probably going to take thousands of lines of code for something that has like 20 lines of code, because you have to check every if, every for, all the combinations, which there might be a lot of. But what if we are building a small app? So I want to have, so part of this talk was inspired by, I had to build a small app for me about some workshops that I'm doing and trainings, and I have no tests in it. 0 tests. So I haven't built a content management system in about 10 years. So I completely lost the whole idea of how that works. I didn't want to use some already built-in CMSs. It's really easy to manually test it. It was a project that took me like 2 or 3 days that I just quickly set up, and it's now online, it works. Let's say you have your clients come and say, oh, there's a Rolling Stones concert in Amsterdam and we want to build an app for it. You really need to test it? It's probably going to be some small app, right? Until Rolling Stones decide to come to Amsterdam again. Or some other music group decides to come into Amsterdam as well. And clients say, well, you already built it once, right? You can just keep pushing them out. It depends in the exploration phase. Enjoy the new language, the new library, the new framework, the new model. Don't be bothered by trying to test it. Try to first enjoy it, try to see if it makes sense to use it. And job security. And I think that this is probably the most important thing. Nobody will fire you if your app has no tests. You're sure for life. Nobody will fire you. They can't. It's too expensive to fire you. But you probably will not be able to find a new job as well. Because other companies already had those issues, so they had to move from one language to another to something until they figured out what the problem is. So if you want to work in that small company forever, working on one project, don't test. Your job is sure, secure. So just a final example. My grandparents had some chickens in their backyard. They didn't have a veterinarian or a lab or something. But no food lab, nothing. They knew they had a few chickens. They were always healthy. But what if I decide to have a farm of chickens with millions of them? Can I use the same principles? Like, why would I need a veterinarian there? Like, I can only kill, what, 1 million people with salmonella or some disease, right? Who cares? Or, okay, the worst case scenario is that somebody's gonna test it in the shop, then they're gonna return all the 1 million chickens back, not pay me. I have to pay to dispose of them. And somebody's gonna sue me probably. But the whole idea is that if I start thinking in the way that if my grandma used to have chickens this way, it's okay for me to scale it in the same way. Please, please, please don't do it. I've been coming to more than a few projects where people expected that a small app functions the same as something that you have to work as a team for 5 years. Thank you.